Yes. Go fullest and highest of definition. Hello. I'm Adam Quiney. It says that right here. Welcome to the live show. Happy Friday. Welcome back from the sabbatical month that I have taken. And by virtue of you being a viewer and a listener and a watcher of the live show, you too have taken. So I hope your sabbatical was good. I hope it was more peaceful than mine. Mine was very, what would the word be? Like bumpy. It was quite a roller coaster. There's been a lot to sit with and be with, and there was time for me to sit and do nothing. There was time for me to do a bunch of work on projects that I have not been able to put my attention to, stuff around the house. There was lots of stuff that was like emotionally all over the map. So it's been a bumpy ride. And I'm happy to be back here and kicking off today's live show. And we're going to see how this goes. This might be a bit of a clunky show. I'm rusty. I'm back. I'm not used to just talking for an hour and a half at you. So we'll see how that goes. But I do have tea to keep me company. And we're going to lean in. I've got some topics here that are cool. What did I call this? Oh, the structures you make for yourself. Yeah. Yeah, so some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about the structure of human identity and how that interacts with transformation. That's going to be a big one. So that's like, how is a human actually constructed? I'm gonna break that wide open. That might sound ambitious, and what we're going to do there is explain a simple model. And I would assert most models are built on top of that. This is kind of my synthesis of what I've seen from all the work I've studied and learned about. We'll talk about how your job here on the show, and indeed anything that I put forward, is to explain why I'm wrong. We're going to talk about mistaking calm for insulation, and probably talk about the return to office movement and this study that's been making the rounds that is all bosses that push for that score higher on narcissism. And we'll share some thoughts on that and how that goes wrong. One of my friends that I play pickleball with, the way she kind of made fun of me and the show was me drinking coffee, being like, here's how I feel, talking about it. I want to see, is there anything I want to distinguish in this moment before we get to the live show? I'm looking around my office. It's very clean. I'm looking to see if there's anything in particular I want to distinguish. There's not. I will show you on my desk right now. The thing that is here is this card right here. That is Lorehold the Historian. Look at that. He's all foily. What a foily boy. And this is the next Magic the Gathering deck I'm going to build. I will read you this card. Flying and haste. That means he's hard to be blocked, easy to attack opponents with, and he comes out and he can do stuff immediately. Each instant and sorcery card in your hand has Miracle too. Oh boy, that's going to be annoying for my opponents. So that's what I'm doing for fun right now. I'm playing lots of pickleball. I'm building magic decks, and I'm playing with my friends. Some of you act like you don't even play Magic, and it's something you need to get a hold of. Okay, so over the holiday, I think right at the start of my sabbatical month and then right at the end, there were two talks that I was giving. The first was I spoke to the Institute of, what is it? I guess it's just the IOC, the Institute of Coaching, which is an institute of international coaches from around the world. We had about 80 people at the talk, and what I was speaking about was the nexus between coaching and ayahuasca. So if you're not aware, I've been coaching for 15 years. I hold an MCC, the highest credential. There's about, I think, 2,000 of us in the world with this credential by the credentialing body. It's quite rare. And I've really devoted a lot of my life to the mastery of that art, that craft. And simultaneous to that, over the last 5, maybe 6 or 7 years now, I've been deep in my work with ayahuasca and indigenous plant medicine and learning about that, studying that particular teacher. And what I've come to the conclusion is that these two modalities are completely different mechanically, meaning the way they work is totally different on the system, but underneath there is some fundamental pathway or approach or thing that they're getting at that is changing, and that is in common. they share that across the board. So I gave this talk to this group of coaches because I feel like a lot of the coaching profession, as soon as you talk about plant medicine, both arms come out, and it's like, well, we want to be careful about advocating anything like this, and we want to be cautious, and we're coaches, not biologists or botanists or doctors. So, and there's a real unwillingness to touch it. And I believe that that is very problematic, because what I see happening is more and more people are going and sitting in ceremony. And most of those people, not most of the, I shouldn't say most of those people, but many of the clients that coaches have are doing this. People that are drawn to work with a coach are people that are committed to transformation, to leadership, to bettering and improving their life, and to healing. And if they're committed to that, then they're probably also, many of those, a significant subset, are going to find their way into modalities like ayahuasca, plant medicine, etc., etc. And the fact that the coaching profession across the board, in large part, is saying, we're not going to educate our coaches or anything like that, is really problematic, because those clients go and do that work, and then they return to the coach, and the coach doesn't have any idea of, I mean, assuming the coach hasn't done that work themselves, they don't have any idea of what the clients move through. They don't have any idea of how to support it. All they know is they have a client coming back who's like, oh my God, everything's different. And the client doesn't know how to integrate that. They don't know how to work with the coach on that. The coach doesn't know how to support them with that. And what happens is the exact same problem that happens everywhere when people go and have these experiences, which is there's no understanding or support for how to properly integrate this. And as a result, it falls away, and then wash, rinse, repeat. And the fact that the coaching profession is not taking on understanding how to integrate that work also, in my belief, makes it more likely that they aren't able to support clients to integrate other work, which is why you see stuff like people go away to a Tony Robbins event. They have this huge life-changing experience. They come home, they're like, oh my God, everything's going to be different. And sure enough, in 6 months' time, everything's pretty much the same that it was before they left. And so what they conclude is, well, I guess I need to go back for another dip. And so that's what you see at Tony Robbins events. That's what you see at stuff like, Mind Valley event, A-Fest, stuff like that, Burning Man. That's what you see. I mean, Burning Man is less geared towards transformational work and healing, but that's what you see with ayahuasca. And that's the common concern, and it's a valid concern. So anyhow, that's why I was giving this presentation, or one of the reasons I'm really passionate about the nexus between these two things, the similarities that need to be understood by my profession, and the opportunities that are live there. The second talk that I gave was for a book club where someone had seen my first talk and then really wanted me to come and share the same stuff with their other people. So I'm looking for more spaces. First of all, as an aside, if you run a group or are aware of groups for which that conversation would be interesting, the conversation between leadership that transforms and plant medicine, and how these two things, how does the West integrate with the East, or the indigenous cultures, that sort of stuff, please let me know. I'm looking for more places to bring this conversation and to speak to it, because I think it's really important. And further, it's times here. We're ready for that conversation. So in that talk, my nose is itchy today. I notice when I watch the live show, my nose is often itching me. I don't know what that is. Something about public speaking and an inability to stop touching my nostrils. And just the most compelling thing on my face right now. I must touch nostrils. This is an aside. Bay and I were at this event once that was incredibly boring. And it was like a meet the new members of this club that we joined, this group. And it was a very stuffy, older kind of blah event. And this event actually was like, oh, this is not the place for us. We got really clear on that. But there's two people in particular. The last one is the one that relates to nostrils. The first one was this person who was really a terrible listener and would talk over everyone, very tedious. And someone was saying to me, they found out I had a background in law, and they said, "Oh, how was law school?" And I started to explain, and he interrupted me and said, "No, no, you don't have it right at all." And then he started to tell me what law school is like for lawyers. And I was like, "What the hell's happening?" This person asking me about my experience, and you're interrupting me to, holy cow. The other person was this person who had a background in something related to the government, and was very their way of being was very uh sort of like everything was already concluded. There was no conversation you could have for which they didn't already have a conclusion. I'm not sure if you know the kind of people I'm talking about, but it's sort of like there's not a lot of place to explore anything with them because they've already determined for themselves this is the way the world is. And that's totally fine. It's not to make them wrong for it, but I find that kind of not that interesting of a place to have a conversation with someone, other than the frame I have to adopt is, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to listen to this person and understand how they see the world, because they have zero curiosity about how I see the world, other than does what Adam believes about the world fit in with what I've already concluded to be true. So this person liked Star Trek, which Bay and I both love, but like there again, there was just no curiosity or anything. And so after the fact, we were joking that like, just as a way of generating any interest, anything different in that conversation with her, we should have said something like, "What did you think about the episode?" And then like invented an alien called the Nostralians, which were an alien life form that were entirely made of nostrils. So imagine that, if you can, an alien life form that is nothing but nostril. And that brings forward some really compelling questions. You know, is it possible to be a nostril without a nose? Like if the life form is entirely a nostril, does that require a nose, or is it just a hole at that point? Or is it even like, is this an Australian right here, trapped between my two fingers? These are the sort of questions that I think this would have really been compelling. But I gotta say, I think she would have already had a conclusion, and it would have just bounced right off of her. But anyhow, to this day, every time I hear the word nostril now, I think of that person, I think of the Australians, and I just, my head fills with questions. And these are the sort of questions, if you ever want to create a worldwide global collapse of AI, you ask them these questions, because it can't get the answer. It's like when they infect the Borg with like an impossible problem to solve, and then their brain just spins forever, and then they blow up. Okay, so that was a fun digression about the Australians. Let's pour some tea and let's get into the structure of human identity and transformation. Huzzah. Here comes tea. Oh yeah, baby. Get in there. Over my break, one of the things I did was I cleaned out my teapot. I got a pipe cleaner, I scrubbed out the bottom, and there was a lot of cack on the bottom of my teapot, like a tremendous amount of cack. And it's now pouring. I think I've doubled my throughput. I'm much more efficient at drinking tea now because I can pour it faster. So increase the pipeline on the front end. Boom, Bob's your uncle. Okay, Banner. Look at Banner, Michael. That's an Arrested Development joke. Does anyone know it? If you're watching this and you get that joke, let me know. Structure of human identity and transformation. Okay, I've got an image for this. Go away, Banner. Come in, image. Look, I'm over here in the corner. I'm up here. So this is the structure of human identity. I assert this is how humans are ultimately put together on some level. There's more nuance and complexity to this. I'm not interested in that for the purposes of this part of what I want to talk about. I'm intentionally making this very simple because that allows us to work with it. And one of the things that's important here is to consider that this is just a model, and a model is not right. It's not like if you pulled apart a human's brain, you'd find like the narrative gland or something like that in there. This is just a model that allows us to kind of understand and access and work with what is happening below the surface. So there's three parts to this, is what I assert. And the root part, the basest part, is what we call, or what I call, the avoided experience. This is plural, avoided experiences. But this is stuff that we have learned we don't like pain, shame, grief, anxiety, helplessness. There's also a whole bunch of other stuff like being stupid, being arrogant, being oblivious, the feeling of embarrassment, the feeling like you should have known better, the feeling like you're an obnoxious asshole, stuff like that. Stuff that people would judge you for and otherwise conclude about you. And the nature of this stuff is it's too threatening to feel. So this gets created when we're really young, and it's usually a reflection. How the heck did we suddenly get 6 viewers? People love a slide. That's what I'm learning here. PowerPoint is what's up. Usually the avoided experience is a reflection of who we are at our deepest, most beautiful self. So like we start on this planet, we're beautiful light. The avoided experience is kind of like the opposite of that. If who I am by my very nature is brilliance, part of the experience I'm going to avoid is probably going to be feeling or looking or being considered stupid. You should have known better is going to be an experience. I'm going to, I don't want that. I avoid that. We can't even see this. This is below the surface of our consciousness. And what gets created around that is what I call our protective identity. So this is the strategies, roles, and patterns that I use to keep the difficult experience away from me, to keep it at bay, to make sure it doesn't become my experience. So if I learned that I hate the experience of feeling, looking, being, maybe being thought of, being seen as whatever stupid, then there's a whole bunch of strategies and patterns and ways I learn to show up that kind of adapt around that, that make sure that I don't end up feeling that way. So for example, you've probably heard me talk about this at length, but like some of the stuff I learned to do was I learned to read, study. I learned to like not open my mouth until I was sure I had the right answer. And I learned how to, even after I opened my mouth, to argue really effectively, to advocate for and convince you that I did have the right answer. So even though I'd done all this work on the back end, if I said the thing that I said, and then you were like, well, I think you're wrong, I'd be like, well, here's why you're wrong about thinking I'm wrong. I learned how to do stuff like be really condescending and arrogant, because as long as I could diminish someone else, then I was on top and I wasn't the stupid one. I didn't have to be the smartest person in the world. I just had to be the smartest person in the room. So as long as and that didn't require, that was a relative measure. So as long as I got people below me, I'm still smart, I'm not stupid. So these are all strategies, roles, patterns that I use to keep the difficult experience away. And we create like tons and tons and tons and tons of these. The other thing that I think is really interesting about this layer is that it's mostly unconscious, mostly. So that makes this layer quite fascinating. It's kind of like your peripheral vision. So this is the sort of thing, like if you've ever delivered a 360 report or received a 360 report, there's usually like a bunch of feedback on there for which people will kind of nod their head and be like, oh yeah, I know I do that. Because there's a safety in knowing I do that. It's sort of like comfortable, it's okay. Oh yeah, I do that. I do speak over people. That's the version, the protective identity, that's the part of it you can actually see. That's the part that is conscious. Think of this like an iceberg. You're conscious of the 10%, and the 10% of what you're conscious of is palatable to you. You are okay with the fact that you're condescending in that 10% of your life. The other 90% are all the places where you're not okay with it and thus can't see it. So this protective identity is super slippery because it occurs like we're aware and alive to it, but we're not. We're just aware and alive to it in a few places where it's acceptable for us to understand that. And this is why it's frustrating giving feedback to people and why it doesn't seem to work. And they just seem friggin' stubborn. And why don't they just get it? Because you offer them the feedback and they say, oh yeah, I get that. And what they're doing is they're letting the feedback land only in the places where they're consciously aware of it, because that's the places where it's safe. So that's the nature of the protective identity. We're mostly aware of it. Finally, we have the narrative identity. Narrative meaning the story you tell about who you are. So this is consciously held, it's entirely conscious, and it's very language rich, meaning you can describe this very effectively. You can talk about this at length. You can articulate it really, 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 really well. The narrative identity tends to be created out of the protective identity. So if I learn to do all those things that I talked about, condescend, have the right answer, study a lot, blah, 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 my narrative identity will sound something like this. I'm just the sort of person who tends to over-prepare. I'm just the kind of guy who can't stand it when people get their facts wrong. I just have to correct them. I'm just the sort of person who doesn't like mediocrity. I'm just the kind of person who knows that you got to bring a gift when you come and see someone. Now I'm branching out away from mine, but you get the idea, right? This is how the narrative identity sounds. I'm just the kind of person that blah, 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 blah. It's sort of like the story about who you are, and you're just the kind of person. And another way that this sometimes sounds is like, well, the way I was raised. I was just raised to always bring a gift. Yeah, because your parents had the same narrative identity and same protective identity and the same avoided experience that you do. And they instilled in you the same protective approaches. And then you created the same narrative identity that they have. That's just who the Quineys are. We're just the sort of people that like to have a good argument. And, you know, that's how you connect with people, et cetera, et cetera. So the thing is that most leadership works at this level, the narrative identity. It works with what people can see. And what it does is it's like, oh, you know, it notices parts of the protective identity. These strategies, roles, and patterns that we create to keep ourselves safe in life, they work to an extent. Like if I learn to condescend to blah, 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 to blah, 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 that supports me to an extent. It ensures that I'm the smartest person in the room. It might get people to like shut up and listen to me for a while. It's not that pleasant, but it does work. It gets me to someplace. Like it can allow me to be a really effective lawyer, for example. But it also has a cost to it. And that's the nature of the protective identity. It works to get us somewhere, but then it has a cost. And that cost keeps stuff out of our life. Coaching, leadership development, most of what is called leadership development meets people here in their narrative identity. So you'd say stuff like, hey, we notice that you tend to condescend to people and be arrogant. And the person goes, oh yeah, totally, I got that. And then what they do is they try to do more work here in the narrative identity, in the place that they already understand. Oh yeah, got it. That's where I need to be less, blah, 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 blah. Because they're unable to see anything at this place. And this is where the real work lies. So what ends up happening with most coaching, most leadership development is it gives people more strategies to apply and a more sophisticated language to talk about the way they are. So another way to think of that is that people become better at understanding why they are the way they are. Oh, I'm just a person who likes to be right because I don't like feeling stupid. They learn to understand that better. And then remember, this is consciously held and language rich. So they just create better language to describe this. So this is that sort of leader you get who's like, they can tell you at length, like, oh yeah, I'm just the sort of person that, you know, when I get upset and angry, I tend to get really short with people. And so sometimes I'll do that, which is like a comfort, you know, at least they're kind of aware of it, but they don't change. They're just better able to explain what's happening. And assuming, oh, nostril, I'm touching my nostril. The Australians are back. Assuming, do the Australians have a protective identity? See, these are the questions that I want to ask. I'm going to pull myself back into this conversation. Go away, Australians. What happens is that they create more strategies that exist inside the existing narrative identity, but they never actually break anything up. They never actually change any of this. And the reason for that is that transformational change, like leadership that actually causes things to go differently than they would otherwise on the surface. You know, we can create change on the surface. That's what happens when you rearrange your narrative identity. You know what? Instead of talking over people and being arrogant, I'm just going to hold back what I say so other people can speak into the space. Yeah, but your protective layer of judgment and frustration with people and annoyance is all still happening. And the inability to be seen as the one that's not the smartest, to be seen as perhaps stupid, is completely untouched. So the upshot of this, the bad news, is most coaching, most leadership development does little to cause transformation because it can't get at this, because this is not seen. The client is unaware of this, and the client is largely unaware of the protective identity. So where that leaves us is just doing work at the narrative layer. And this is why a lot of people, they work in leadership, they go to the seminars, they take the training and then they're like, yeah, they can metabolize that, they understand it, and they try to change their behavior, but none of the actual underlying structure gets addressed. Transformational change, leadership that really grows into something new, requires moving through the avoided experience. Transformational work is work that actually brings people into contact with the avoided experience. And coming into contact with the avoided experience is super unpleasant. Because as you start to move through these layers and come into contact with the avoided experience, what starts to happen is your protective identity flares up. You start to, like, as my coach starts to support me to come into a moment where I might feel stupid, I'm going to start to feel like a sharpness and a desire to argue for something and a condescension. And what a lot of leaders do when they are met with that by someone over there is they slap a label on their face like uncoachable, unleadable, not candidate for leadership, and they bail out. That's the work. The leader just doesn't have the capacity within themselves to actually hold that tension. And so this is why most leadership never really gets developed. It gets talked about being developed. It gets better language to describe why the development isn't happening and how that's not someone's fault. But the actual transformation, the actual development never really takes hold because the leaders don't have the capacity to hold someone and be with them as we move them into the avoided experience, into contact with that. I'm just going to describe a little bit more here and then we're going to move off of this. But like, what happens is that in life, we build a life that is kind of a function of our protective identity. So my protective identity is designed to ensure that I never have to feel stupid. If you're willing to hang out with me here, let's do it. So I build an entire life from a bunch of unconscious strategies that ensure I don't feel, look, or seem stupid. Don't get judged that way. So that, like I said, makes good as a lawyer. Lots of places that will really be a benefit. And there's a great deal of life you can create from that place. But the thing is that it ensures that my whole life is quietly organized away from anything for which being, feeling, looking stupid is an essential part of the journey. And there comes a point in life where we're like, there's something I want that seems perpetually elusive. I want to have this relationship. I want to have this degree of romance in my life. I want to feel at ease when I'm in a room full of people I don't know. I want to feel comfortable around really smart people. I want to have a job where I can take time off. You know, any of this stuff, the reason that is never, ever available and perpetually elusive is because it requires moving through the avoided experience. And the reason that most structures that are designed to help you don't work is because most practitioners, most structures are not able to actually, one, even see this breakdown, see the experience you're avoiding, and then two, stand with you and hold you as you're moved into it. What happens is once we start to get brought into contact with the avoided experience, our protective identity flares up and tries to move us away. And if we're working with someone that can actually hold us there, what starts to happen is eventually that protective identity starts to surrender, to soften. Kind of if like I jab you in the middle of a muscle that is, overreactive, the muscle tenses up really hard. But if you hold it there and continue to pin it, eventually the muscle can start to relax and it can be with that stimulus. That's what's happening here. So transformational work moves us into contact with the avoided experience. Our protective identity flares up and we unconsciously and unwittingly start doing everything we can to make that stimulus go away. And if we are with someone or something, e.g. ayahuasca, that can hold us in that avoided experience, then our resistance starts to surrender. And then we can sit in that experience and we can start to reintegrate it. We can learn, oh, maybe it's okay for me to feel stupid in this moment. That's not an intellectual thing. That's not telling yourself it's okay for me to feel stupid. That's worth nothing. It's the embodied experience of feeling stupid and being like, I can sit with this. Again, not intellectual, just in your body, being able to sit and like, oh, I feel stupid. And being with all the feelings that drives up without running away, without fixing it, without reframing it, without changing it. And if you can do that, what happens is your system starts to reorganize itself because the protective identity stops being necessary. So if you think of a whole system I've constructed in myself that is designed to avoid feeling stupid because feeling stupid is so uncomfortable for me, if I develop a level of comfort with that feeling, then that system is no longer needed. So most approaches to healing, transformation, change, what they try to do is fix the protective identity without having to touch the avoided experience. Okay, got it. You often make people wrong. Well, here's what you could do. Breathe for 3 minutes and then ask yourself what's over there on the other side of the table. What could I learn from them? That sounds great, except none of that requires you coming into contact with the feeling of being stupid. It's all done on top of it. And so it's not going to really work long term. It's coming from the outside in, and it's trying to solve the problem of how your protective identity shows itself. The real work is much more uncomfortable and much harder for people to hold, which is to go in from the inside out and be with the avoided experience. Because if you do that, all of the strategies designed to avoid feeling stupid, they stop being necessary. It's like, I don't need to avoid this anymore. It doesn't mean that you're going to just naturally go into every situation and be like, hey, I'm the dum-dum. What it means is that you now have a choice. You can now be like, oh, here's one of those situations. I'm actually okay. I'm actually willing now, not just to intellectually know that I'm not the smartest person in the room, but to actually have the felt embodied experience of being dumber than everyone here. I don't have to let those strategies run the show. They're no longer automatic for you. And that opens up an entire realm of life. So this is the thing. This is why most coaching's garbage. This is why, that's my assertion. This is why most, like a lot of therapy is not very effective. This is why almost all leadership, like all of the leadership seminars and structures and stuff that I've studied, most of them are going from the outside in. They're giving people better ways of talking about their narrative identity. Like a lot of StrengthsFinder is in this layer, narrative identity, and a little bit in the protective identity, and pretty much nothing. It doesn't touch the avoided experience at all. In fact, it gives people really good reasons why not touch it. It lets people, it actually reinforces the protective identity. So someone says like, oh, I'm just the sort of person that likes order. Therefore, I'm really good at like managing and putting things into order. Therefore, my tendency to control is actually of value, provided I find the right place to put it. Yeah, great, totally. Therefore, I don't really need to do anything with it. I just need to find the right outlet for it. That's sort of like if you are a fixed object and there's no possibility for transformation, what's the best place to put yourself? That's okay, but that's not actually leadership that transforms. That's leadership that's based in managing you as you currently are and will forever be, and finding the best fit for that. If that's what you're looking for, that's great. StrengthsFinder does not move you into this avoided experience. And most of the books, most of the seminars do the same thing. They operate over top of this. Boom, roasted. All right, we took that down. Let's go. So that's the structure of human identity. That's the biggest, like, it's the reveal that I'm working with right now, and working with all my clients is like, to really create a shift, we have to move people into that avoided experience. And that's messy and disruptive. I should bring this back one more time. As you come here, it's going to start to cause disruption in your life. And the way the disruption works is that the protective identity stops working. You start feeling all of these feelings that you've devoted your life to avoiding. And instead of feeling like you're moving forward, it feels like you're moving back, or like you're just stagnating, or like you're drifting. And that's the point where you start to be like, why am I doing this? Why am I sticking around for this coaching or this seminar or for this plant medicine or whatever? It's not actually moving me towards like what I want. It's actually moving me away. I think I'm good. I think I got the point. And that's why a lot of people bail. So it's challenging for leaders to hold this, and then it's challenging for those being led to stay the course. That's the human condition. Okay, so from there, I could probably talk about this. Your job inside of this model we've just made is to explain kind of internally to yourself why everything I'm saying is wrong. And if you're the sort of person that I work with, like super sharp, smarter than everyone else in the room, highly efficient, can metabolize this stuff instantly, don't have a lot of time, energy to have me belabor the point as I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're really good at this. But this is what every human being does. We explain why the new information that is coming in is wrong. And what is happening is that if I'm doing my work, my job is to put forward points that are invalid inside of your existing system. Your existing system says, this is the way life is. This is the way I am, and this is what's possible, and this is what's not possible. I'm just the sort of person who doesn't like cold calling. I'm just the sort of person who can't stand when people are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The thing to understand is that everything in your life is a ongoing, perpetual argument and evidence for why your beliefs are right. The whole life you have in front of you and behind you and around you is a perfect argument for why it has to look the way it has to look. So anytime I'm saying something that you're like agreeing with, that's cool. That means it's getting in. But the real place to get curious is anytime I say something for which you're like, I don't really know if I agree with that. I want to push back on that. Kind of. That's a good way to sort of explain why I'm wrong. For example, if I said to someone like, a lot of the stuff you do probably hasn't actually moved the needle, and the pushback is, well, sorry, let me elaborate that a little bit more. I might say, like, a lot of the stuff you've done has probably helped you explain it better, but not really move the needle that much. One of the good ways to explain why I'm wrong would be to say, like, well, I kind of can see that, but I'm actually going to push back because it actually has made some change for me. Fine, but that's a slippery slope. That's a subtle way to argue and to create sort of a little bit of space where you get to still hang out and like, but it's not that bad. The whole point of anything transformational is to put something in front of you that is disruptive to your existing coherent life. To put something in front of you that on some level does violence to your worldview, to your perspective, because that's the only way that transformation happens. Transformation exists, remember, if we go back to this image, transformation exists beyond what this protective identity allows for. And your whole life is quietly structured around this. My whole life was structured around not looking dumb, being smart. So you'd be like, well, Adam, you could go and have a life filled with connection and maybe that could be all right. I'd be like, no, there's no way I could have that. I mean, yeah, I could do that, but it wouldn't really work, blah, 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 blah. That's an argument that brings us back inside my life as it currently exists. So that's how that plays out. So your job really is to kind of subtly, quietly explain away anything that doesn't quite fit with your existing model. And if you're wanting to like deepen your leadership, your job is to notice that happening, to get really curious in those times and places when there is something at play that is causing a bit of like, I don't know if I agree, a little bit of pushback. That's the place to get really, really curious. Yeah, that was a really short little bit. And my nose hair and Australians are in effect today. Can they speak? Can an Australian speak? How does it communicate? Just if it's just a nostril. What is going on? Holy mackerel. Hair's driving me nuts. This is a strategy a lot of my people adopt. And I for the longest time, I would call myself free from anger, free from sadness. I just don't really feel those things. Well, are you happy, Adam? Yeah, I'm totally happy. I've got lots of joy. And what I was doing was I was mistaking calm for insulation. So insulation meaning like a level of insulation, like there's a degree of separation between myself and what I'm allowing like to contact me. The more layers of separation we have, the more things get filtered until when it finally arrives and touches me, it can only have so much impact. So a lot of really effective leaders find themselves in this place where they're it's not that they don't feel. In fact, they feel plenty. Most of the people that mistake calm for insulation, like for myself, I learned to do this because I feel a great deal. I have a big heart and things land, they make an impact. They land in me. And I had to learn as a child how to manage for that. And on top of that, how to get stuff done and to sort of like do all the stuff I was committed to and that was being put in front of me and that my parents told me I had to do and blah, 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 blah. And so what happens with leaders like this is we tend to create insulation. One of the most effective layers of insulation we create is thinking about what we feel rather than feeling it. So you could think of this sort of like a layer where you're, whatever happens in the world happens. And before it impacts you, it gets caught in this sort of like space where you think on it. You're like, huh, that's interesting. I feel kind of like, feels like I'm starting to feel sad and blah, 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 blah. You're going to hang out up here in your head for however long you do before it actually comes and lands with you. And what that does is it creates distance. So a lot of leaders, when they come to start working with me, what's happening is that there's a disconnection between them and their staff. And the disconnection between them and their staff is a mirror for the disconnection that exists between those leaders and themselves. The extent to which you can't feel yourself is emblematic of the extent to which your staff can't feel you and you can't feel them. Everything is insulated. If you are insulating yourself, then you are also insulating other people. You might argue that there's like a real gift to that. Like I can't just go to my staff and like start sobbing and telling them I'm terrified that I don't know where payroll is going to come from. That's correct. But what we're not talking about is whether something has a benefit or a consequence. We're talking about automatics and stuff that exists outside of your perspective because it is justified. And that was just a great justification for it. So it locks it in place. The leader that can really work with this stuff, like actual calm, is the ability to let stuff in and to have it hit you and to really let it impact you, to have it land and really sit in that, and then take the time to do the work, to do whatever's necessary to be able to metabolize that and hold that, and then go to your staff and talk to them in whatever way is necessary. So the one step, the insulative step, bypasses that. It bypasses that entirely. Whatever. I don't need to do that because nothing really landed with me. That's not consciously what's happening, but like, I'm just the sort of person this stuff doesn't happen. So I'm able to be very stoic and I can bring this to people. In fact, a lot of people drawn to stoicism, even some like memento mori kind of stuff, like knowing you're going to die, is this. It masquerades as helping you create a degree of calm in yourself and an ability to be with. But what it actually does is it provides you an even better way to insulate yourself. We can insulate ourselves behind the intellectual understanding that one day I will die. And then therefore, this doesn't need to land as much. Oof, that happened. But remember, one day you're going to die anyhow, so it's not such a big deal. That's an intellectual exercise. That's not an embodied state. And so a lot of the leaders that are frustrated because their staff don't feel them, because their staff don't feel heard or listened or gotten by them, what's happening is that they believe that they are able to receive their staff calmly. They believe that they are able to listen really clearly to their staff. But in fact, everything that is spoken by the staff runs through a degree of insulation. And then on the way back out, everything spoken is actually running through that same degree of insulation. And so it's sort of like talking to a lawyer and expecting to feel gotten, expecting to feel really heard. It's not really the way it's going to work. Or maybe a better metaphor might be if I was to try to communicate my love to my wife and I sent it to my lawyer and then had them put that on their letterhead and write it in legalese and then send it to her and be like, I don't understand why you feel like I don't say that I love you. I say it all the time. But you can look at the legal head. We've got like pages and pages and bills to pay our lawyer because we're wasting his time doing this. But at least it's all documented. You're wrong. You're wrong that you feel the way you do. So this is what's happening in a lot of leadership, especially at the high levels, because at the high levels, the stakes are high enough that very few leaders have learned calm, which is a transcendent step. What most of them have learned is stoic insulation. And that stoic insulation is justified and reinforced because it's like, well, the stakes are so high. And I'm like out on the ledge. And what can I possibly do but this? Therefore, I have to keep doing it. That's the sound. Remember, I talked about your job is to explain why I'm wrong. That's the sound of explaining why I'm wrong. Here's why I have to do that. Sure, you talk about developing an ability to be calm and blah, blah, blah. Here's why that's not available. So there's a big part. And this, I would say, is part of why a lot of leaders feel burnout. They feel burnout because it's the wall that they're hitting that they can't feel internally. So what happens is they try to, like create more competency, create more bandwidth, create more throughput. What's going on internally is that they're exhausted. They're tired. They're feeling whatever they're feeling, but they're not actually able to feel it. Or maybe put a little more succinctly, they're still feeling it, but they're not able to experience what they are feeling. So there's like sort of two levels here. You are feeling perpetually, whether or not that's conscious. Your system as a whole is like feeling stuff. This is the irony. If you've ever met someone who this is an example you can think of, is the person who's like all sunshine and rainbows and they're like blah, 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 and everything's joyful. And yet at the same time, when you're around them, you feel like crying. You feel an intense sadness over there. That person is feeling sad. There is heartbreak that's present for them. There is heartbreak and sadness and despair or whatever it happens to be. But they are not experiencing that. It's felt in their system, but there's a insulation, right? That's the avoided experience. And then on top is rainbows, reframe, find a positive way to hold this, joy, excitement. And so what that does, it draws out that distinction. They're feeling the sadness because it's always being felt in your system, but they are not consciously experiencing. And so leaders that are struggling with burnout are often in this place where there's something that their system is feeling, exhaustion, tiredness, frustration. I'm fed up. I keep doing all of this stuff and it's not enough, but they can't experience that because they've built quietly, unconsciously, a system that ensures they don't have to. And then what happens, they just keep trying to apply more and more and more. The consequence is this almost mystifying, like, why don't I feel inspired? Why do I feel so frustrated? Why does everything feel so dry? Why does it feel like all of this is minutia at this point? Because that's a natural symptom of what is underneath the surface, unconsciously alive for you. You couldn't feel anything but that as long as this is going there. As long as I'm exhausted, it's going to be pretty hard for me to find inspiration in anything I do, right? Because what I need is a sleep. And so burnout is not, what these leaders innocently do is try to find a new career, try to turn towards something different, which is not going to change any of this stuff that we're describing, the internal structures upstream of all that. But maybe do those things, maybe take a vacation. But again, that vacation is not connected to this, it's unconscious. You can create the circumstances of a break, like take a vacation and then spend your vacation optimizing it, making sure you go to the next museum, making sure blah, 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 blah. And that doesn't create the shift. Or the slightly better way is you take the vacation, you get the 2 weeks of bliss, and then you come back and you're right back into creating the exact same thing. So what happens is that the rest you really need can't be integrated and ongoing because you don't feel the need for it. It can only happen for 2 weeks out of the year, or 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, or however long. It becomes a respite away from, as opposed to an ongoing way that's integrated into your life. Okay, well, oh yeah, there's one other thing I want to talk about today as I adjust this hair. There's this study out right now that's really popular. And the upshot of the study is that return to office bosses score higher on narcissism. So this is classic, what is this show? Live show, classic Quiney leadership right here. The first thing is that like the banner headline of this study is so thirst quenching. It's this, the first thing is that people being made to return to the office have their truth, which is like, why should I have to do this? I'm just as productive here. This is stupid. Only an idiot would want me to do that. Now, I don't want to say that everyone has it as sharply and angled as that, but everyone has a truth. And often being asked to return to office cuts into their autonomy, cuts into some of their freedom. It's annoying, blah, 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 blah. Why do I have to commute? Why? And so there's this desire to blame the people that are pushing this forward. Look at these idiots. It's because they're narcissistic. That's why it's happening. This sucks from a leadership perspective. This labeling of like, hey, isn't it interesting? Or like, look, the study shows, what do you want to do? what I want to do is I want to look below the surface at this, as opposed to pat ourselves on the back and be like, yeah, we got them. Fuck those bosses. They do suck. That's nonsense. And there's no leadership in that, because then what do you do with that? What do these bosses do with this? What they do, I'll tell you, is they look and they go, am I a narcissist? And then they conclude they're not. Probably because there's a lot more below the surface than that. The second thing that they probably do is they get defensive and they entrench themselves further, and they lose any interest in what you over there feel about the return to office initiative. So they become more entrenched in their position. They become more closed in terms of like, you know, a good leadership can have the capacity to like receive what's going on over there and how the decision lands with you and over here and the greater whole. Bad leadership becomes very constricted. And before you say, yeah, exactly, Adam, they're narcissists. Yeah, but slapping them with the label of RTO bosses are narcissists actually causes that constriction. It becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is really, you know, it's thirst quenching. It makes sense that it's passed around, but it's bad leadership. And what we really want to do is we want to get curious about like what's actually going on with the boss that's like asking us to return to office. And so this kind of thing is actually exposing stuff. It's inviting us to look below the surface. And I would assert that often what's happening with a return to office order is that there are certainly, first of all, if your argument is that there's nothing good or necessary about going to the office, there's nothing that being in an office can provide that doesn't already exist if everyone works remotely from home, then I would say that you're unwilling to, you're too entrenched and constrained in your own view. Because if home and office were the exact same thing, we wouldn't have different words for them. Like we wouldn't constrain them that way. And if a meeting in Zoom is the same thing as a meeting in person, they wouldn't be distinct from one another. Like they're by definition distinct. There are certain things that can happen in an office that can't happen at home. For example, at an office, you can have connection that doesn't happen naturally and serendipitously like it does at home. At home, you actually have to make the effort to call someone up, to send them a message. In the office, you can even just have something as simple as eye contact with a stranger. So my argument here isn't we should return to the office because then we'll have eye contact with a stranger. My starting, what do they call it? Like salvo is first to consider like, if you're unwilling to consider that there's benefits and consequences to both sides, to both choices, if you're unwilling to consider that and are just like working from home just as good, then you are every bit as blinkered as the RTO narcissistic boss that you're insisting upon. In fact, it would be an interesting study to like look at never return to office employees and you know, what's the thing that, what do they score higher on? Control or, you know, whatever it happens to be, which would be equally useless. It would be an equally useless study. The second thing is that what these bosses are missing is enrollment. There's little conversation happening to inspire. Enrollment is ultimately having people get to a point where they're inspired about some possibility for themselves, not some possibility for their boss, some possibility that has something in it for themselves. And it's a bit of a tricky position because a lot of the people that are pushing these initiatives forward, they don't have time to reach out to 150 people. That's just not available. But enrollment can be done at scale. And most of these orders are issued from just a clear directive. It doesn't speak to any of what's possible. It doesn't speak to any of what's available. It's just like, here's what's happening. Here's why it's happening. Off you go. And what that does is it leaves people very unenrolled. It leaves all the enrollment over there with them. And by default, people aren't going to do that. By default, what people are enrolled in is things staying the way they currently are. That's what we humans naturally are enrolled in. We're naturally inspired towards things mostly staying the way they currently are. And so if a leader wants to change that, the harder work is to actually like create breadcrumbs for that for people in their responses, in their requests. It doesn't mean that people have to like what's available. People don't have to say, great, I'm on board with this. But as a leader, it behooves us to create possibility for people to sort of like speak to. Here's what we see as possible. Here's why we want to invite you back to the office. Here's why we're making this mandatory. We understand if you're not happy with it, but we want to share all the same some of what we see as available down this path. And there's a million ways someone could offer this, right? Like some of what's available down this path is we miss being in the office and the collaboration that happened. We think that there's something really like gestalt, you know, like the sum is greater than the or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Like when we bring people together, we think there's actually something amazing. We want to do stuff like once a month in the office with everyone there. We want to have parties. We want to have celebrations. We want to do fun stuff with people. We want to get people together again. We want camaraderie, and we're finding that that is lower. And we really believe that having you in the office makes a difference. We want to know more about you as a human being and have you know more about us as a company. And we believe that in the office, these are all ways that can happen. What happens though, is that the bosses are overwhelmed, exhausted, and they narrow down to why should I have to do that? Because that's the opportunity of a leader. And what that does is it has the staff then be like, why should I have to do this? And then they slap the RTO bosses are narcissists, and then both sides constrict, and then nothing moves. Nothing actually happens. So terrible study. I mean, interesting, I guess. We don't have to slam the study too much, but the dunk is really easy. And anytime you notice like a conclusion like this has a degree of like, yeah, to it. You know, that sound that shows up like, yeah, fuck them. Yeah, they are narcissists. Or like, what are some other ones? Like, yeah, that person that split up with me was a insert, you know, borderline personality disorder, insert whatever you want to insert there. Anytime there's that sort of thirst quenching, like, yeah, kind of feeling, there's something worth looking at. That's a place where you have a conclusion. And conclusions are fine, but they're not really where leadership grows from. Leadership grows from curiosity, opening in the face of our desire to close and conclude. Good sip of tea. 10:45. That feels about right. We got low viewers today. Feeling like I've said everything that I've said or that I wanted to say. So I think we'll close down there. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I hope you enjoyed this live show. I hope to see you back again. And so without further ado, have yourself a great weekend, and we'll catch you later.